Hi, my name is Michael Cecchin. The smartest people I've met have one common belief, that us silly humans really don't know much. For example, we still don't know why planes stay in the air, or how Tylenol or even gravity works. Yeah, gravity. Look it up. In today's distracted, clickbait, misinformation age, I wish we could all be less certain, more humble, and a lot more curious. Admittedly, I've been known to struggle with all three. So no more, no less, this show is my attempt to be that change. Thanks for joining me, and here we go. Hey everybody, welcome back to No More, No Less. I'm your host, Michael Cecchin, and today is going to be your first solo mic-isode. People have been telling me for a while that I should do a solo episode. The first was my cousin, John Paul, asking me. And now it turns out that I've run out of guests. So I'm going to do one of these before I have some amazing people that are scheduled for the next few weeks to interview. So this is my first mic-isode. If you're watching on YouTube, I don't even know how to directly look in the camera all the time, so this could get a bit messy. But I'm going to do my best to wing it here. I've got some super fun articles that I've been reading to share with you. One is The Science of Spiritual Narcissism, and the other one is by a psychologist who thinks that mindfulness is bullshit, which I thought was super fascinating, and I'll share that all with you, and you can be the judge on what you think of that. I think I'd first like to start by looking to the camera. It's so weird to not look at anybody. And I wanted to go through, I guess, what I've learned on this journey so far with this podcast, because when I first started it, the idea was simply to do it as a gift to myself, because I've wanted to do a podcast for, I think, 10 years now, and I just couldn't find anyone that wanted to do it with me, that they were too scared to be on camera. They thought we had nothing to offer, and I just wanted to do it for fun. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago I had the idea again, and then where I was living during COVID at the time was super noisy, so I couldn't, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so last year I decided I'm going to, as a gift to myself, do 10 episodes and just publish them and see how it goes. And lo and behold, here we are at episode 27. I'm doing a mic-isode, and I'm really happy with it. I've found so much joy talking to these random people, because I've kind of been honestly having these conversations most of my life, and I think a lot of my close friends already know that. If they're doing something really cool and interesting, I just want to ask questions and talk to them about it and kind of dive into their world. I've always been really curious like that, and I don't know where it comes from. I don't know where it continues to come from, but it's brought me a lot of joy in my life, and I think it's brought me closer to a lot of people as I've taken more interest in what they do, how they see things, and I've grown substantially in my life just learning from people like that. So getting the opportunity to interview authors and scientists and invite them on the show has really been a great joy. One that stands out for me was someone named Carl Safina. I think he was episode 20, blah, blah, I don't know, 24, I don't know, 23. And I saw him on like a climate podcast that I listen to sometimes, and I just thought he sounded really cool, and the things that he was doing were like super interesting. He's been studying nature and animals for his entire life, and he's written, I don't know, like 10 books and has received a MacArthur Prize. And I just sent an email to his people on a whim one day, and 2 days later I got an email back saying he wants to schedule the interview. And I was really honored and like nervous to have that call with this really accomplished writer and ecologist. And we had a great chat. He was just such a nice guy, and he was so open. And it sounds like his next book is going to be really amazing, because it seems like he's taken all of his work for teaching us how special the natural world is and how sentient most animals are, and we don't think they are, and how animals have culture similar to humans, which is what his last book was about. But now it seems like he's taking the macro approach to looking at the world, and he's going to be investigating how human supremacy has left us to devalue the world, devalue our planet, devalue our own existence, because a lot of human supremacy he's purporting potentially could have come from these Abrahamic religions that value the next life, quote unquote, instead of the current life. And so we devalue everything that we have, from each other to the planet and our, animal brothers and sisters. And I think it'll be really interesting. So that one really, really stuck with me. And then what else? All of them were great, honestly. One that was particularly fun was with a good friend of mine, Andreas Cambanis, who runs Nibble Apps, which is an app company, and they have his company has one of the top food and drink apps on the Apple App Store, helping people to give them recipes and meal plans. And it's a really amazing app. It's a really powerful tool what they've built over the last, I guess it's 5 or 6 years now. But it was just so much fun. I think that that's what I took away with it. Like, I get to interview one of my closest friends. We talk for an hour, share things we've learned that we hadn't talked about before. And it was just hilarious, like when him and I hang out normally. And so that was a really cool venue to do that. And it made me think of like, oh, maybe I can just have on, other friends. Because when I first started this podcast, I thought like, well, I'm not Joe Rogan. I'm not this famous neuroscientist. I'm not this storied author or motivational speaker. Like, who can I find to be on this? And then sure enough, I had enough contacts through my web of network that I was able to, cobble together the first 10 episodes. But then now I've also been thinking of like, what are the people in my life that, aren't these, storied professionals that can come on and just chat about something about their experience in life that would help. And one that I'm really looking forward to that I just scheduled yesterday is a friend of mine is going to come on. He's from Toronto, and he's going to tell me about what it's like to be Black in Canada. Because obviously if you're watching this video, especially with these lights, I am very not Black. And so I think a lot of Canadians get the idea that we have this idea of Blackness in America, and we've heard all the stories. We've all been, not been through, Jesus. We've all witnessed what happened to George Floyd and that entire movement with BLM, etc. But I think most white Canadians would say like, oh, yeah, being Black in Canada is great. Like, it's wonderful. And so when him and I were having a really lovely catch-up call the other day, we were talking about this, and he's like, yeah, it's not that great. Like, there are a lot of things that we could talk about this. And he's also a very thoughtful person on the subject, and he's a basketball coach, and he coaches kids of diverse backgrounds, but I think half his team is Black. So he also sees it from his perspective and from the younger perspective, and I'm really excited to have that conversation. This is a guy I've known for, I don't know, probably almost 20 years. We used to work together. One of my first jobs out of university. So, and the other one is the Manhood podcast episode that I did with 3 guys from the men's group that I'm a part of here in Barcelona. And I found like a local studio for us to record. And it was really fun. The conversation was great. I could have been a little bit better with my hosting. Even where I sat was a bit difficult. I was kind of craning my neck back and forth. But it was really fun. And I was really happy with how that conversation turned out. And the most popular one, YouTube-wise, has been the recent one from Tales from a Narcissist Divorce Coach. Some of those videos were catching fire, and by catching fire, I mean like 200 400 views for my small channel. I was really pumped about that. But she said a lot of interesting things from her background, and also now, because she's not a psychologist, she's a survivor of emotional abuse in a relationship with a narcissist or someone with a B cluster personality disorder. I'm going to try to find a psychologist to come on board and talk to me about, because she said that these people are unrehabilitatable, and I don't think that's true from other conversations I've had with people. Everyone, as far as I know, has some narcissistic traits. I mean, like, we are quite a selfish species, and actually I'll get to that with the two articles I want to present to you today. But some people are, malignant narcissists that are very dangerous to the people that they get close to, and they can ruin people's lives in ways that I think Victoria and I were talking about in our episode. So I'll have someone on to talk about, like, how some narcissists do have therapy and they do get better and they do become positive forces in the lives of those around them. And then, other people that have, like, I think the B cluster personality disorders are like maybe bipolar, narcissist personality disorder. I can't remember. I think histrionic personality disorder, and there's another one. I can't remember. I'm obviously not the professional here. I hope this episode's going pretty well so far. I mean, like, I've been talking for 11 minutes, and I really don't know what I'm doing here for this solo podcast. But it's fun, and everyone out there, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate everyone that tunes in anywhere on any platform, and especially on YouTube. I think it's super fun to share this information with you. And if you want to comment on YouTube, or if you know anybody that you think would be a good fit for this podcast, please email me at no more no less pod@gmail.com. And obviously the no is KNOW for both times in the title. And you can even find me on Instagram at Michael Cecchin, MichaelCecchin is my handle. And slide into my DMs if you know anybody that could be great for this podcast. But anyway, I'll do these from time to time if I have something cool to share. Like, so far, this has been pretty painless, but it's just great to be doing this and sharing this with you and people that comment on YouTube. I appreciate that. And that's it. So let's get into some of the things that I brought to share with you. The first one is so I basically just put a bunch of things into a Word doc. So I'm going to read you parts of these articles to share and give some of my feedback as well. So there's this one Substack. I think it's just a general psychology, but the person that writes it I find really interesting. And she's always looking to debunk things because, psychology can be, from my experience with it and reading about it, etc., it's a tough circle to square for some topics, because they're even having a reproducibility crisis for a lot of the studies that were done in the past, 40 years or longer. When they do those studies now, they can't get the same results. And they see some of that can be because the study mechanisms were faulty, or that they're always doing these studies on, there's an acronym for it, but it's always specifically people from the West, from the Western civilization, white students, a specific age. So, like, when you do these on adults or you do them on minority populations, it just doesn't hold. And so there's a lot of goodness, I think, that comes from psychology, because they're like most scientific fields. This is kind of one of the social sciences, soft sciences, people call them, but they're still moving forward. I think most people in the field want to know where they're wrong, or where they're where their industry has been wrong. And so it's great to see other psychologists stepping up to say like, oh, that this doesn't make any sense. We should stop doing these. And that starts the kinds of conversations that I'm trying to bring up today and in this article I read. So this woman purports that mindfulness is basically not useless, but if there is a modicum of benefit to doing mindfulness training, which I think is synonymous with meditation, it should also be said that doing many other things that are even good for you, like going for a run, going for a walk, reading a book, painting, doing some coloring, writing, playing an instrument, like all of these things should not be degraded, I guess, below mindfulness, because there really is not enough evidence that mindfulness is as good for us as a lot of these spiritual practitioners and people selling courses online like to tell us. There is a lot of connection with mindfulness, with yogiism, if that's a thing, yoga people, and Eastern philosophy and Buddhist meditations and things like that. And anyone that's listened to this podcast knows that anything that I realize has a foundation in religion, my default is to say it's probably bullshit. And I think most times I've proven myself right with that, but I still like to see where there maybe is middle ground, because in my life, there definitely was a season in my life where I meditated twice a day for 20 minutes for 6 months, and it was really, really good for me. I think because I had a very overactive brain at that time. I had just moved to Barcelona. I was figuring out what it meant to be an entrepreneur. I needed to find friends in a city in which I knew no one, and my brain was honestly kind of attacking itself during that time. I think I was also going through a breakup at that time. So like there's just a hurricane of shit in my brain that I really needed to give more attention to, but also to like learn how to not listen so much to these thoughts that were coming in. And it helped me immensely to be able to control my thoughts, to realize that they are just thoughts. They're not real assertions of who I am or what the future might be. And it allowed me to really thrive during that year. Like I learned Spanish. I started 2 new businesses that, did very well over the years. I made some amazing friends in Barcelona. And I really, the start of that was me meditating. And I think I stopped halfway through the year. But during that time, I found it very, very helpful. Would it have been as helpful if I would have taken piano lessons, which I did in the second part of the year, or just read more? I really don't know. So maybe the mechanism is just to not be wallowing in your thoughts and just do something that is good for you and helpful, that maybe distracts you from your thoughts a little bit while your anxious brain burns itself out. I don't know. So what this woman says in this article is that less than 0.1% of mindfulness studies can be regarded as credible. And she's done some real digging. And so she says, most are manipulated in order to try to show mindfulness in a positive light, carefully avoiding comparing mindfulness with other more beneficial activities and completely ignoring the confounding variables. So she says, nevertheless, one such large study of 8,400 students published just last year could not disguise the harm done to the children who participated in their schools. So that was a real big one. When I wish I could see that study. She didn't really go into the depths of that study and how the harm was done to these children. But I would imagine if you have anxious children these days, especially in the time of social media and all this and all these things, that to just sit with your thoughts, and you're not old enough to know how serious these thoughts should be taken, then maybe it could be really painful. Like I know of friends that have done Vipassana meditation, like a 10-day meditation retreat. A couple people have really loved it, and a couple people have said it was like the worst torture they've ever done to themselves in their lives, and they'll never ever do it again. Like those are pretty strong words, and that came from a few people that have done the Vipassana meditation. So I think the important thing is we realize that meditation really isn't for everybody. Like if you do find benefit from it, then sure. But to think that we have to do this thing to get benefit, and if we don't, then it's our fault. Then I think that's kind of more dangerous, because those people are probably already quite anxious and hard on themselves. And so if mindfulness is making them harder on themselves, well, then that's not helpful. Maybe there's something else, like like piano or hanging out with your friends, or I don't know, So that's kind of my take on that. And moving forward, so she says, mindfulness can be regarded as another name for acceptance and commitment therapy. Short form is ACT. So she says some people say that it's not, but she purports that it has the same genesis as ACT because there's so many overlaps. And her words are, it's all the same bullshit with questionable history and hyped up, unvalidated claims. She says it comes directly from Eastern philosophy and Buddhist meditation practice, which first gained a foothold in Europe and now unfortunately has spread worldwide and is popular among psychologists, even though so far valid studies show it to have little to no effect. And clearly it's not superior to any else at all that someone may do for recreation. So she says, in mindfulness, one mindfully contemplates and recognizes one's thoughts and experiences and accepts them, which supposedly reduces suffering. And she says, well, here we are again with the BS claim that we only suffer because we think we are suffering. And that's a lot to unpack. I think a lot of the Stoicism people that are listening to this are probably already getting angry, because there's a lot of this Marcus Aurelius rhetoric and people that think that the only reason we suffer is because we allow ourselves to. And I think that goes pretty well with people that are already comfortable, quote unquote, emotionally suppressing how they feel. But that's not the case in my experience, and the more I've gone down this path on another topic entirely, is that if we ignore our emotions or teach our brain to ignore our emotions, to me it's like cutting off a limb, and it's like losing one of your senses, because our emotions are there in many respects to guide us. Yes, they're not always like anxiety is an overactive threat system, but if we cut off that part of us where we can't feel when something bad is happening or when we're experiencing something negative, then we don't know when to make a decision to remove ourselves from that situation, or to leave a bad relationship, or to, I don't know, I think you can just think of all the other things that you wouldn't be able to figure out in your life if you just have no access to your emotions. So if you just pretend, essentially, that you're not suffering, like that emotion has to go somewhere. And there seems to be mounting evidence these days. I read this in the book, The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, that when you're suppressing your emotion, especially things like anger and sadness for so long, it ends up presenting in like physical and mental ailments. And there's really is a lot of evidence for this. I really highly recommend that book. So I think what she's saying here is that it's a BS claim to think that we only suffer in our life because our brain tells us we're suffering. And a lot of times our brain might tell us we're suffering because we're suffering, and there's things that we need to resolve. Actually, on that note, the author of this article goes to say she finds it deeply concerning that people are asked to spend hours, quote unquote, belly button gazing their feelings about their pain and distress, especially when issues need to be resolved, or when it's possible to simply eliminate those things very rapidly and permanently without fuss. In other words, mindfulness should not be used to manipulate people into putting up with things they have no need to put up with. I love this. That whole article I love. That whole paragraph I love. Because, yeah, I think everyone would agree to wallow in these feelings of either self-loathing or your pain and distress. Like we have to turn that into action at some point. Otherwise, it really just becomes a depressive state, I would imagine. Like, I think we all know that I'm no psychological expert here. So I'm not claiming anything, but these are the things that I've seen over the years with myself and other people, and obviously those things that I've read, where I think a lot of the spiritual mindfulness meditative practices seem to be coming from to teach us to deal with a system that is fundamentally fucking broken. Like if it's how we deal with this idea of, this dichotomy of gender, that we're either here or there, and that's it, and there's nothing in between, and getting into how exploitative a lot of our economic systems can be. And that's not saying there's not benefit there, but the things that are bad, if we just pretend that they're not, and I have to deal with it, or I have to go and make $500,000 a year, or I can't afford my rent in my home, and I'm a failure. Like these things that are like those ideas are out there on YouTube and a lot of these entrepreneur communities, and I think most of us would agree they're fucking garbage. But the idea that we need to put up with these things instead of accepting how we feel, and I think maybe coming together as a people to make life better for each other, I think is a more healthy way than us just to figure out a way to deal with all the bullshit that we have to deal with. So I really love that paragraph, and she adds on that in addition, mindfulness is also a sedentary activity, and that therefore does not contribute to mental or physical health in the way that an active recreational or social choice is proven to do. So I really love that. And the final part is a more recent study by someone named Collins found that daily playing of a game like Tetris on a mobile phone or in the lab and in the field in relation to work stress was found to be superior to mindfulness in terms of increasing energy and job satisfaction and reducing stress. So mindfulness was actually in that study associated with decreasing energy levels. So I think she's mostly reasonable in the things that she's saying. Mindfulness is a sedentary activity. And if you do it twice a day for 20 minutes each, then you could be on the bike. You could be going for a walk and breathing air. You could be sitting in nature. You could be talking to a friend and connecting to people. You could be reading a book. I think 20 minutes a day on the piano has shown over a year, you can get pretty damn good. And so I think there's a lot to be said that, maybe mindfulness isn't right for everybody, and we should consider how we feel when we do these things. And maybe there's something else that we could do that is more beneficial than just sitting down with our thoughts. If you have a very busy life and you're always doing things like this, and you try mindfulness and you find that just sitting down for 20 minutes and breathing helps you get control of your life or feel like you have control of your life, then amazing. Then you should keep doing that, because maybe that's the time that you take for yourself in the morning or before bed that allows you to separate yourself and your well-being from all the chaos that is in your life, even if it's family stuff. If you just have a ton of kids that are, taking a lot of your energy, and you're on call 24/7, and maybe that 10 minutes, 20 minutes of mindfulness is what you need, then amazing. But I think what this study and these studies and this author is saying is that maybe some people would just be better off taking that time in the bath or reading a book or doing other things. So I think it's quite reasonable, and that we shouldn't put as much so much emphasis on mindfulness to be this amazing thing that everybody should do at all the times. And I definitely am guilty of going down that path in the past and trying to get people in my life that I love to meditate more often, because I thought it would help them, because it helped me at the time. But I think, like most things, it would be more reasonable to say, just find something that is a hobby that makes you feel good, that you enjoy, that brings benefit to your life. So that's that. I hope I've looked at the camera enough during this time. I don't think that I have. But the next thing I want to chat about, right after I sneeze here, excuse me, is I want to talk about something called spiritual narcissism. This thing is pretty much in line with the last article on meditation, and there's a couple funny lines that I really appreciate. So, the science of spiritual narcissism, it's self-enhancement through spiritual practices can fool some of us into thinking we're evolving and growing when we're all just growing our own ego. So this is written by Scott Barry Kaufman, PhD. He's a humanistic psychologist exploring the depths of human potential. It's a pretty good title. A purported benefit of mind-body spiritual practices such as meditation, yoga, I would say mindfulness as well, but maybe that's just meditation, whatever. And healing and energy healing, which I have a bit of a problem with, is what people think quiets the ego. And it's really interesting because I'm in Barcelona right now, and one of the things I love about the city is there's a gigantic Venn diagram for all the different groups of people that are in the city. They're the hedonists that just want to party, go to clubs, do drugs, all that stuff. There are the hippies that believe in the crystals. Some people think they're witches. Some are, doing all these things that I think are, way outside the realm of reasonable believability, like energy healing as well, like all these Reiki things. I'm not a fan. But there's also like the fitness crowd, and there's also like your entrepreneurs and even some surfers, and so. But you can dip in and out of these in these groups, which I really love. Like if I want to go to like something like a sound healing and see what that's like, then I can go and do that. If I want to go to like a Wim Hof like breathing retreat, I can go and do that. But if I want to go and meet with people on a rooftop and talk about business, I can go and do that. And there's a lot of like artists in this city as well. But it's been I bring that up because it's been interesting to see like people that I know go in and out of these different things, and we talk about if they found benefit. And there's something called a Kundalini activation process, CAP, K-A-P for short. Now, I recommend people go watch these things on YouTube because they look fucking crazy. I'm sorry, but they do. Like there's a woman kneeling over these people, pretending that she can control their energy, and like she looks like someone who's pretending to be a sorcerer in a Marvel movie, a bad Marvel movie. And they're kind of like, if you could see me on camera, like they're like using their fingers and doing these things and going across your body like this, and like they do, like I don't even know what they're doing, but it's great to watch, I'll be honest. But the people that are there, they seem to be going through quite an experience. And I have a friend of mine here, and she's a CEO of an HR company, and she's a very like straightforward person, like fairly logical, reasonable. And she was telling me that she went and did one of these CAP practices, and like she was really letting out a lot of like sadness and pain from her past, and she was crying, and it was really loud, and she was in a group of people, and she didn't expect to have that sort of experience. And so we had a really great conversation about it. And there's a couple other guys in my circle who've also heard of these things, but we have kind of the same idea of that there's probably not a lot of validity that it's this manipulator, energy healer that's doing anything, but perhaps it's the environment themselves. If a human being steps into an environment where they feel safe to just let out maybe some emotional roadblocks in their heart and their mind, then they just go for it. And if they feel that this is a place for them to cathartically release all of this inner trauma and emotion that in their regular everyday life they cannot. And perhaps I think as humans we're very connective, and there's other things about how we can connect to humans that we don't understand yet. That maybe having everyone in this group that is there potentially looking for answers because maybe they do have a lot of unresolved trauma in their life, then maybe it allows everyone to, I don't know, somehow connect, to be able to feel safe in a room with other people like that, and then they can let all of these things out. And if people find benefit in that, I think it's amazing. Do I think that the energy healer is there and this Kundalini activation process is a fundamental scientific thing that you can reproduce in any environment? No, I don't, and it does look quite silly if you watch it on YouTube. But I think it doesn't mean I don't think that there is benefit. I just think perhaps the mechanics that people use to do it isn't like if you have a headache, take this medication. That's not a good example either. But I think you know what I mean. Like I don't think it's like you can always pull this lever and do really well to release this sort of trauma. I think there's other things behind the scene that it works despite of itself. But I've also not spoken to everyone that have done it. There's people I've heard that have found zero benefit as well. So I think it's interesting to be aware of these things, and I try not to dismiss it out of hand, which is really tough for me because I'm a skeptic at heart. I just go so far as to say that this thing is not for me. I don't want to do that, and that's okay. And if someone else wants to do it, I think as long as there is no mechanism that could hurt a person trying these things, I'd say I'm all for people doing things like that. I think some of these spiritual practices, or people, I think when people are using these things to make decisions in their lives, opposed to just like trying to connect with themselves and feel how you feel about this thing and then making a decision for yourself, I think that's where it's more dangerous, when you leave the decisions in your life up to quote unquote the universe. I think it's easy for people to be manipulated and led by people who do not have their best interests at heart, because they're afraid of making decisions on their own. And yeah, I think that's the thing that I'm kind of aware of, these spiritual environments. Unfortunately, a lot of people will take advantage of the people that might follow them, and it can turn into kind of like a negative place from some things I've seen. So anyhow, I'm starting to ramble. Let's keep going. So in the article, it says a purported benefit of mind-body spiritual practices like yoga. So the idea is it's supposed to quiet the ego and providing an effective antidote to this exalted self. And it says, yes, such practices do have the potential for such an awakening, allowing us to get more in touch with reality as it is right here and now, including the qualities we don't like about ourselves. Spiritual practices also have the potential to help us cultivate compassion, concern, and unconditional positive regard towards others, things that can truly evolve our consciousness as a species. So it is saying that, there's the potential for all of these things along the lines of what I was just spouting on about. It says, however, this is all much easier said than done. As been observed by many spiritual leaders, practitioners, and psychologists over the years, the ego has this incessant need to be seen in a positive light and will eagerly hijack whatever flow of consciousness it can use for enhancement. So walking the spiritual path properly is a very subtle process. It's not something they say that people should walk into naively. There's a number of sidetracks which lead to distorted, ego-centered version of spirituality, and we can deceive ourselves into thinking we're developing spiritually when instead we're strengthening our egocentricity through spiritual techniques. And they talk about in the next paragraph why. So psychologists point out that the potential for spirituality to serve as a tool for self-enhancement. So according to this guy, William James, he's the father of American psychology. I don't know what that really means, but any skill that increases its centrality in the self system is likely to breed a bias towards self-enhancement. So as it turns out, there's no domain of human skill that has been found to be exempt from this. It's called the self-centrality principle. And it seems to be a part that's inextricable from human nature. So the idea that anything that we try to improve ourselves, it goes to make us feel better about ourselves, opposed to quieting the ego. So it's kind of the opposite. So in the domain of spirituality, it says self-enhancement through these practices can fool us into thinking that we're evolving or that we're growing, when in fact we're really just growing our ego. And so some psychologists have pointed out that the self-enhancement that occurs in spiritual practices can lead to the "I'm enlightened and you're not" syndrome, or this idea of spiritual bypass, by which people seek to use spiritual beliefs and practices and experiences to actually avoid genuine contact with their psychological unfinished business. Now, I think we've all met these people in life. I'm sure most of us have been that person at one point or another, where you're trying to be so much more spiritual and like just doing so much yoga or so much meditation, where like honestly you probably need to just talk to your mom, like have that conversation that you've wanted to have since you were 16. Or there's a friend that you don't talk to anymore because you guys had a falling out and it's been plaguing you, or you betrayed a friend or an ex-partner and you just feel like you're an asshole. Like just talk to those people. Like have those hard conversations, and at least you'll feel better that you did. An anecdote from my own life, maybe 10 years ago, I had a falling out with a really good friend of mine from high school, and it was a decision I made to separate a business relationship that we had, and the decision I made was right. The reason why I did it was correct. Our relationship within the business environment wasn't good for either of us. However, the way I dealt with it was really ugly. And the way that I broke this news to him and the way that I followed up with it was brutal. And we just stopped talking. He was super pissed at me. I understand why he was pissed at me. And then I ended up moving away, so we didn't talk. But like him and I were such good friends throughout high school and into our late 20s, early 30s. So like every now and then I think about him and I would think like, oh man, I was a real fucking dick. Like I really shouldn't have done that. And then when I moved back to Toronto for a year, I was talking to a friend of mine. Her name's Christina, and she's a amazing hairstylist in Toronto. And I was telling her about like that I had this thought to reach out to this guy, and she was really, I think, extra kind and said like, Mike, I know you to be this fearless guy that goes out and travels and does these things and starts these businesses, and I don't think you should feel like you can't do this. I know that you can do this, and you should reach out to him if that's what you think. Like, come on, you're not you're not someone that lets fear dominate your decisions. And she got me with that. Like she pumped my tires enough that I was like, yeah, I can do this. Yeah, I can do this. All right. Talk to myself like a coach. And sure enough, that night after her and I had dinner, I went to my email and I wrote him a letter and said like, hey guy, I'm in Toronto now. I've been thinking about you, and I wanted to say hi, and hopefully maybe we can meet up at some point and catch up. And sure enough, the next day he wrote me and said, great to hear from me. And we met up for dinner, I think a week later. And, I think like a lot of men and a lot of people, you just don't want to talk about that fight you had because you're fearful that you're going to have that fight again, or it's going to bring up a lot of bad feelings. And I really went into that dinner thinking like, no, I have to talk about this. I don't want to pretend that this didn't happen, that I didn't act like a dick. Like I really want to make amends here. And so I brought it up, and as soon as I brought it up, he said, yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And I'm like, no, man, I've worried about it for a while, and I want to apologize for, I think the decision I made was right, but the way that I made it, I didn't value our friendship as much as it deserved to be valued for the history that we had. how close we were. And you could tell that he appreciated that, and he apologized for some of his actions on his side as well. And it was really great. And he and I could have had that, we could have had that conversation 10 fucking years ago. And so I really am a big believer, and I think it goes on at some point in this article, that like, to just accepting life for what it is. And if we can connect to our feelings more and be like, yeah, I feel really shitty for this thing that I did, or I feel really shitty that this person did this thing to me. I would like to have this conversation. And if you're the person that did the shitty thing, well, that's something that you can own up for. And anytime anyone has ever done something shitty in my life and they've apologized for it, man, have I appreciated it. A friend did it, I think in my early 20s. And it really stuck with me because I felt so appreciative that he came forward to say, I'm sorry, that like, I really try to integrate that into my life, even today with, various degrees of success, obviously. So I think if you can accept that you need to make amends for something and then push through that fear of rejection or vulnerability and do it, I think it's obviously way more helpful than doing extra yoga or, taking psychedelics or all of these things. And I'm not saying yoga and psychedelics and mindfulness don't have their benefits, but I'm saying sometimes, like these two articles have said, sometimes just doing the work and dealing with the really fucking gross stuff, like getting into the muck, is the fastest way to like feel better about yourself and life and your relationships in general. That's how I've been looking at it, and it's been pretty helpful for me. So this idea of that we're boosting our own ego instead of quieting it, the author goes on to say, so just how much of a problem is this really? And what does the data actually say? That this is one of the biggest paradoxes of our time, that like, if a major point of yoga, this is pretty funny actually, she says, if a major point of yoga is quieting the ego and reducing focus on ourselves, why are there so many yoga pose pictures on Instagram? I laughed out loud at that because there really are a lot of yoga poses on Instagram. It's getting out of hand. There's so many backbends that I don't know. There's a lot of them, but it is funny to think about that. If that was the initial purpose of yoga, but now to put yoga alongside social media, well, that's a tough one. So the article goes on to say they measured self-enhancement through a standard measure of self-esteem, as well as by asking people the degree to which they perceive themselves as better than the average yoga student in their class. They also included a measure of communal narcissism, which is a cool term I'm just learning. So it means it's a form of narcissism in which one thinks that they alone will save the world and that they are the most helpful person of them all. Like someone thinking that they'll be known for all the good deeds that they have done. And research shows that communal narcissism is correlated with grandiose narcissism and of all the entitlement, arrogance, and overconfidence that goes along with it. I've never heard of that term. I think it's super interesting because there's some people think that we can be altruistic humans by being selfish, and what is good for us means the people around us are taken care of, and that means being good to them. And if we think we are connected to the planet and we're one with the planet, and that means we need to take care of the planet to take care of ourselves, and that creates this virtuous cycle. So I think I'm going to read more about communal narcissism afterwards and see what that means, because it sounds like a super interesting concept. And now the researchers of this found that higher levels of self-centrality as well as self-enhancement, like higher self-esteem, better than average judgments, and communal narcissism, among those who had just completed a yoga class compared to those who hadn't engaged in any yoga class in the past 24 hours. That paragraph got a little messy, so let's forget I said that. But anyhow, the whole idea here is that this finding hinted at the idea that the well-being benefits of this spiritual practice may actually come from boosting self-esteem and not through ego quieting. So you feel better because you're doing this spiritual practice. You feel like a better person because you've done yoga. You feel better, like a better person because you went to an ecstatic dance and you hung out with people that were just all dancing around and being pretty happy. But has nothing to do with actually quieting the ego, which is super interesting. So the last part of this is that the author says, like, okay, well, is there a healthy spiritual practice that we can have? And so is there any way around this allure of spiritual narcissism? And it's all well and good that gurus espouse like the importance of quieting the ego, but in practice, can we override this self-centrality principle and transcend the spiritual narcissism? And this guy says simply, the first step is self-awareness that it's incredibly difficult to do this, that to quiet the ego is one of the hardest things a human being can do, because the ego is so important to kind of who we are as a species. And so one serious obstacle to this healthy transcendence is how spiritual practices are sold to the masses, and how yoga and mindfulness are big business in America and in the West, for example, and that the purported benefits of meditation have generated like billions and billions of dollars, and yoga is the most popular mind-body practice in Western societies. And most of these programs, they have such a long list of promises, like the reduction of stress and anxiety, along with greater confidence, creativity, focus, achievement, success, better habits, better sex, sleep, happy, like all of these things. Like, you do yoga, your dick's gonna get bigger, you're gonna be taller, and you'll have that, that beautiful C cup you've always wanted. Like, it is ridiculous. I think we all know this about the healthcare wellness community. But what this article says is that, so healthy transcendence doesn't stem from an attempt at distracting oneself from the displeasure with reality. Healthy transcendence involves confronting reality as it is, truly, and head on, with equanimity, which is, I think, like calmness and I don't know what equanimity totally means. I'm going to find that out right now. I don't know, guys. Okay, sorry. You guys can look it up. So, healthy transcendence involves confronting reality as it truly is, with equanimity and loving kindness. And so it's not about leaving any parts of ourselves or anyone else behind, or singularly rising above the rest of humanity. We're not going to do that. We're like, none of us are that special. Like, we all have to, deal with the hard parts of life, and a lot of that is mental health. Like, there's a hilarious comedian that tells a joke about Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, that like, that guy still has to wipe after he takes a shit like the rest of us. And sometimes, he's got too much on the on the paper. He's got to wipe again. He's got to think about if he should keep wiping. Like, we're all humans. Like, even the ones that seem to rise above us economically or in other ways, like, we're all dealing with a whole bunch of shit and faulty wiring at the end of the day. And so it's not about being outside of the whole of humanity or feeling superior to the whole, but being a part of the whole of human existence, and that we're all going through this. So the last sentence is, healthy transcendence involves harnessing all that you are in the service of realizing the best version of yourself, so you can help raise the bar for the whole of humanity. And I think that's great. So in summation, I think, if you're doing a spiritual practice to make yourself feel better, whatever it is, even if it's sleeping with crystals in your bed, joining a bunch of people that want to chant in a room, or if you want to do this Kundalini practice. And I think if you are doing it to help yourself, and it does become helpful, well, then that's great. I think if we start feeding the ego that we think we're better than everybody else because we're rising above this thing, because we're being quote unquote spiritual, that seems to be where we bump up against some problems for what our goal is to just be calmer and live a life that is more connected, that is more fulfilling. And I think that fills us with more love, giving and receiving from the people around us. So That went on for 53 minutes. I can't believe maybe that coffee was stronger than I thought. Anyway, thank you guys, whoever is going to sit through this for this first Micasode. I hope those 2 articles I went through were helpful. I'll try to be a little funnier on the other ones. I'm kind of nervous doing this one, but thank you so much for joining, for listening, for being with me through this episode and all the other ones. And please hit your like and subscribe if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. Please, smash that 5-star rating and leave a comment. I love all of you guys. Mwah. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next time. This was fun. Bye. So thanks for listening to No More, No Less. I appreciate the time you spent with me today. So please subscribe and rate the show if you enjoyed it. It'll help me create more amazing content and get that next little bit of validation that I so deeply crave. If you didn't enjoy it, well, that sucks. But to make sure, I think you should listen to my next 10 episodes and then decide. I mean, come on. Rome was not built in a day. I'm just getting warmed up here, guys. So thanks again. See you next time.